In February of 2003, the RPG Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne released in Japan, and just under a year later in 2004, a director's cut version known as the Maniacs Edition was put out with additional content. This is the version the rest of the world would experience and features an extended side quest, letting players get another ending called the True Demon Ending. Nocturne's True Demon Ending is reached by completing the game's optional dungeon and defeating the true final boss, Lucifer. Surprisingly, completing these requirements on the hardest difficulty is the most popular speedrunning category for this title. But it wasn't long ago that no one was willing to take on this game. You see, Nocturne has this reputation of being one of the hardest RPGs from the 6th generation of home consoles. Even on its normal difficulty setting, the game is absolutely brutal. For a long time, no one dared take on the challenge of Nocturne speedrunning, let alone attempt its hardest difficulty. However, runners would rise to the occasion, eventually culminating in a battle between the biggest contributors to see who had the best way to beat the game. I'm going to tell you about their exploits and much more. This is the story of Nocturne's hard difficulty True Demon Ending speedrun. Our history begins about 6 years after the game's Western release. During this era, a website called Speed Demos Archive would be the main place where speedruns were featured. The site also hosted a forum that had a flourishing community, in which members would collaborate and come up with new strategies for games they wanted to take on. Most of these were shorter, more accessible games that could be completed in a single sitting, meaning something like the Mega Man or Mario series were sure to have a ton of runners working on them. However, the speedrunning community was small and less known than today. Combine this with the technological limitations of the time, and this meant that the only long speedruns you'd see were more of popular titles like the Final Fantasy series. This brings us to the first aspect of difficulty Nocturne has to offer. Atlus is no stranger to giving players an RPG experience that can take 50 hours or more to complete, so it's no surprise that Nocturne's True Demon Ending takes upwards of 70 hours to complete casually. With this talk about how long Nocturne is, it's a good time to go over the route normal players take to complete it. If you've completed the game, this will be a good refresher. For those who haven't played Nocturne, this should give you a basic understanding of what to expect. The game takes place in Tokyo, Japan, where you, the main character, are meeting up with your classmates and teacher at a local hospital. On the way, the main character makes a detour to Yoyogi Park after hearing about a protest that turned violent in the area. A snappy-dressed fellow by the name of Hijiri reveals that people died not from a protest, but rather a clash between two cults. After getting a call from one of his friends, Chiaki, the main character heads to the medical center and goes to look for his teacher. In the process, he finds his other friend, Isamu, and eventually heads to the hospital basement to find a man worshipping his demonic supercomputer. This is Hikawa, and he's about to use his new rig to summon a digital demon to kill the main character. Thankfully, you're saved by your teacher, Yuko, and taken to the hospital's roof to witness the world's rebirth. After the world changes during the prologue, the main character is turned into a demon by a funny-looking child and his guardian. The main character then tries to find his friends, his teacher, and Hikawa, the man responsible for all of this. This takes the Demi-Fiend through 22 locations in the Vortex world, with some locations requiring revisits for various reasons like event triggers, boss fights, and demon recruiting. After escaping from the Shinjuku Medical Center, players go through Yoyogi Park and Shibuya, following clues to find the main character's friends and other objectives. After being sent to the Amala network with help from Hijiri and getting access to the game's fast travel system, Players reach Ginza and its respective underpass. The underpass is home to mannequins, a race of beings that are basically human emotions made into mud people. They block progression through the back half of the underpass, but after a side quest, the player is allowed through, eventually reaching Ikebukuro. This location is home to the Mantra and their headquarters. The Mantra are one of several factions in the Vortex world, looking to recreate it in their image. With their philosophy focusing on the strongest prevailing over all else, they unsurprisingly create some problems for the Demi-Fiend. Ikebukuro and the Mantra HQ takes the player through several boss fights, eventually leading to a meeting with the Mantra's leader, Gozu Tenno. Then you end up joining his army in a raid on the Assembly of Nihilo, another of the game's factions. This faction also happens to be led by Hikawa, which honestly shouldn't be surprising at this point. After braving the difficult dungeon and defeating Hikawa's demon, he launches an attack on the Mantra using his nightmare system, killing off many of their ranks and acquiring their Magotsui. This is a form of energy that lies within humans and mannequins, which is a great source of power in this game's world. After checking on the decimated faction and talking to some old friends, players reach Kabukicho Prison. This is where the remainder of the mannequins and their leader, Fudomimi, are being held, and upon beating the boss of the dungeon, they're freed and taken by their leader to Asakusa, which happens to be the Demi-Fiend's next destination after watching Isamu get sucked into a magic cylinder. Once reaching Asakusa, the Demi-Fiend learns of Hikawa's other method of gathering Magotsui, thanks to a conversation from Hijiri. So after visiting the murderous mannequin Sakahagi and reaching the sacred land of Mifunashiro, the next destination is Obelisk, a towering dungeon with Magotsui amassing at the very top. Upon reaching the top and defeating several more bosses guarding the peak, the Demi-Fiend briefly converses with his teacher, the deity Aradia, and the child who made him a demon earlier in the game. After another small trip through the Amala network to find Isamu, players go back to Yoyogi Park to face off against the mannequin Sakahagi. The Demi-Fiend also runs into his teacher right after the fight, and he gives her the Magotsui collecting device. At this point in the game after the confrontation, the character arcs of our friends and enemies start to wrap up. These events progress as follows. The Amala network's third visit, leading to the Amala temple and ending with Isamu turning into Noah, entering the center of Mifunashiro, witnessing the end of the mannequins and Chiaki turning into the Bao avatar, and finally reaching the diet building from Yurakucho Tunnel, ending with Hikawa turning into Aramon and the teacher fading into the abyss. These three events allowed the Demi-Fiend to cause the moon, Kagetsuchi, to send down a tower from the heavens by using a large amount of Magotsui left at the Amala temple. Before the end of the related cutscene, however, the player is encountered by the old woman and the kid one last time, suggesting that the Demi-Fiend visit the old gentleman living deep in the Red Labyrinth. This leads players to the section of the game which allows this video to exist in the first place. A special dungeon called the Labyrinth of Amala was introduced in Nocturne's Maniacs version and is required to reach the true demon ending. It is separated into 5 levels, known as Kalpas, and each one needs specific candelabra, or menorahs, to access. These are held by powerful fiends, all having unique and challenging fights meant to test the Demi-Fiend's strength. There are also bosses in Kalpas 3 through 5, which need to be defeated before the player can progress. In the final dungeon, the Tower of Kagetsuchi, the Demi-Fiend needs to climb through the tower and reach the top to enter the final boss gauntlet. There are 4 bosses that need to be defeated prior to finishing this area. 3 of these are reason bosses, which are Hikawa, Isamu, and Chiaki's summoned deities that I mentioned earlier. Each reason boss drops a stone, and all 3 of these will need to be brought to the final room in the tower. Once this is completed, the Demi-Fiend fights Kagetsuchi. Normally, defeating this boss would cause an ending scene, and the game would be over. However, if the player completes the Labyrinth of Amala before the final dungeon, they gain access to one last battle with Lucifer, and the reward for defeating him is the true demon ending, with players being treated to a bonus cutscene where the Demi-Fiend leads Lucifer's army against Great Will. This lengthy route, combined with the game's notorious difficulty, would deter anyone on SDA from running the game. So we need to look elsewhere when talking about Nocturne speedrunning origins. This is Nico Video, a Japanese video sharing website that works kinda like YouTube. The reason I'm showing you all this is because the SMT series at this time was already several games deep in Japan, as opposed to the West just having Nocturne. As you might guess, the series was much more popular in the East, and with that came with more interest from Japanese runners in beating the game fast. The first recorded attempts are dated all the way back to late 2010, with a runner by the name of Tobira being the only one with footage from that era. Unfortunately, there's no info on a full game time from his Nico video page, as these videos are simply highlights from attempts. Live streaming was still in its early days, and as a result, most runners either still couldn't record locally or didn't think to save their VODs, leaving their exploits long forgotten as lost media. Tobira also could only stream sporadically due to his job and personal life demanding much of his time. By December of 2011 though, he would finish his initial routing of Hard True Demon Ending, and while it would take 4 months for him to do a playthrough with his strategies, he eventually obtained an in-game time of 13 hours and 13 minutes before the final boss on March 18, 2012. With that accomplishment, Tobira was ready to begin streaming his attempts. And while these runs no longer exist, we get a glimpse into what he experienced from more of his posts, stating he obtained a time of 16 hours, 36 minutes, and 16 seconds on March 28, 2012. This run beat a previously listed record from another runner by the name of Mizushima40, who had an 18-hour and 40-minute time obtained on December of 2011. While this was great for Tobira, he knew there was much more time to save before he would be satisfied. By May of 2012, he was routing in even more improvements, saving 25 minutes alone before the final boss gauntlet according to one of his posts. And just 2 days later, something unexpected would happen. An actual VOD of Tobira's attempt, captured and still available to this very day? Stuff like this didn't happen, especially for a game as underground in the speedrunning community like Nocturne. However, as underground as it was, there were a couple of people routing the game on the English side. One of these runners was deeply integrated with the SDA community, and his name was RomScout.
It's happening. No way. It's real. It's so real. Look at the split. Look at that fucking split.
RomScout is known for his incredible accomplishments in Castlevania Symphony of the Night during the game's early days in speedrunning, but he's also a big fan of the Megaten series. At the time, RomScout and another runner by the name of BML were trying to complete a run of Nocturne's hard TDE category, but needed the final pieces to the massive puzzle. Just days earlier, RomScout came across a post from Tobira where he mentioned he was going to stream his attempts to Nico Video live. So on May 6, 2012, RomScout fired up his stream and rebroadcasted Tobira's attempt so it wouldn't be lost to time. Now this was going to be a long session, so RomScout and a few other runners would sit on a Skype call for most of the run, hanging out, reacting to strategies, and providing some peak 2012 commentary.
God, and so he just moonwalk over to the store. Awesome. So
what up? This guy is a true badass. If that's how he's playing this game.
That's amazing.
Bitches don't give a fuck.
Look at him, dude. He's fucking just going all over the place like that.
Aside some trolling from the peanut gallery, it seemed like Nocturne was giving Tobira some decent luck, setting him up to make history. Before we learn the outcome of this run though, we need to go over a couple of things, starting with how to even play this titan of a game. Nocturne's gameplay mechanics should be familiar to you if you played any SMT titles, but here's a quick rundown for those unfamiliar or to refresh your memory. Nocturne is your standard adventure RPG. Defeat enemies to gain levels and become more powerful, all while advancing the game's story. Then you just rinse and repeat until you beat the game. The game's encounters are randomly triggered in danger areas after moving a certain distance. The little indicator on the bottom right will let you know when you're close to getting into a fight. All battles in this game, whether it be random or boss fights, have the same parameters for completion. If you defeat all the enemies, you win, earning experience and Maka. However, if the main character dies, it's game over and you will have to reload from the last save, losing all of your progress. Within these encounters at first glance, there's the usual turn-based system we've come to expect from an RPG. Your turns are displayed in the top right corner as little icons equal to the amount of party members you have in battle. Performing an action makes one of these icons disappear, and when all the icons are gone, it becomes the enemy's turn. However, it's not that simple, and it's thanks to the game's unique press turn system. Doing things such as hitting an opponent's weak point or scoring a critical hit will cause your turn indicator to start blinking instead of disappearing, all before moving to the next character in the turn order. This is called a half press turn, and it can send you to a parallel universe. Alright, you caught me. It doesn't actually do that, but it can potentially double the amount of actions before the enemy has a chance to act. There's also effects that can remove turns as well. If you dodge an attack or void element damage, 2 turns can be removed from the enemy's press turn count instead of 1. Repelling or draining an element removes them all entirely. All skills in the game have an elemental affinity attached to them. For attack skills, these are physical, fire, ice, elect, force, expel, death, curse, nerve, mind, and finally almighty. It goes deeper than this, but for now these 11 elements are all you need to know about. If a demon voids an element, it cancels out the damage entirely. If they repel it, it'll be reflected back at the user. If they drain that element, it will heal the target. These mechanics help immensely in taking on large encounter formations and bosses, allowing players to end these fights with ease. However, one major issue arises when putting press turns into practice. It turns out the enemy can take full advantage of this system, and they're not afraid to send a main character straight to the Shadow Realm if players are not careful. Combine this with a difficulty setting that says, and I quote, "a level of difficulty suitable for those seeking the thrill of death," and well...
No, Lilum, please don't. Are you kidding me?
First turn's Empress.
Don't you see
I'm
that?
voting on Mata first turn.
I have never seen that before.
Not Seros.
The hard difficulty setting is no joke, and it comes with a list of devastating restrictions and modifiers to make the player suffer. All damage dealt to the player's party is doubled, shot prices that require Maka are tripled, damage from poison sources in the overworld are tripled, and to top it all off, there is a 0% run chance in random fights, meaning players will mostly use an ability called Trifuri to escape from battle as needed. When completing an encounter by defeating all enemies, all living party members get EXP and level up when enough is accrued. This allows characters to increase stats and learn new abilities as they grow. As the main character levels up, you can put points into any given stat. Now when it comes to leveling demons, they have it a little harder than the main character. Instead of allocating stat points manually, they will randomly increase a stat. However, demons can have specific stats increased by the player through other game mechanics. Demons can also change a random skill if you let them, and they can give you random items they find if you're lucky. Speaking of these party members, let's talk about the importance of demons in the speedrun. The runner's choice of demons can significantly impact many parts of a Nocturne run. We're talking about abilities, passive effects, weaknesses and resistances, and so much more. Tobira understood this, and you'll see how these choices impact each run throughout this video. Most of the early game focuses on recruiting demons that help carry the run in some way or another. Pixie is an unskippable but reliable demon with decent healing and attack capabilities. Shikigami repels elect attacks and has a useful recruiting ability called Beseech. Other important recruits at the start of Tobira's run are Huapo and Kodama, giving variety to his party and setting it for later parts of the game. Unfortunately, recruiting demons is probably the biggest crapshoot in Nocturne. The amount of resources needed to get even a single new party member can be crippling for the runner. Not just that, but the response to the demon's question at the end doesn't even matter. It's literally predetermined if a negotiation will fail or succeed. So without extra negotiation abilities, you just gotta hope it works. Also, if your level isn't equal to or higher than the base level of the demon you're trying to recruit, they straight up won't join you. Things like this make the early game an absolute nightmare to deal with, as most time gain or time loss is based on if demons cooperate. But if runners can manage to recruit ones needed for their route, the next step in getting a powerful party lies in the Cathedral of Shadows. Demon Fusion is a mechanic where two compatible classes of demons can be combined to make a new, stronger demon. Nocturne pressures players into changing party members often by making demons have much slower EXP progression than the main character. Fusions can get complicated pretty fast, so let's break down how they work. First of all, the demon you receive from the fusion is based on the families combined. Taking Tobira's first fusion, Huapo falls under the Jirei family of demons, and Apsaris from the Yoma set of demons. These two combined will give a demon from the Beast family. The demon received from the set is derived from the base values of the fusion materials. Since Huapo has a base level of 5 and Apsaris a base level of 8, the received demon will be equal to or greater than level 6.5. Since the lowest base level from the Beast family is 13, you'll receive an Inugami from the fusion. There's also different fusions when combining two demons from the same family, resulting in elementals. These elementals can be used to upgrade and downgrade certain types of demons. Elementals can also be combined to make mitamas, demons which increase various stats of what they're fused into. It's also important to note that in addition to fusing or summoning these from the compendium, both elementals and mitamas can be bought by trading gemstones to Rag's gem shop in Ginza, giving runners yet another option to power up their demons. Other useful items can be bought there as well, which runners take advantage of throughout their attempts. Since most fusion outcomes are based on the demon's family, this creates endless routing opportunities to reach similar, if not the exact same results. However, this amazing mechanic comes with several restrictions that runners need to work with. To start, Demifiend's level needs to be equal to or higher than the demon being produced from the fusion. While the main character has faster level ups than his demon companions, it's not enough to prevent several bottlenecks throughout the run, where grinding levels is required to progress safely. To make grinding faster, runners can use a spell called Ribarama to increase the rate of encounters, and increase the likelihood that additional enemies will join the same fight after a group is defeated. This allows runners to gain more experience before needing to start another fight. Alternatively, if runners don't want to get encounters, they can use a spell called Estoma, preventing fights with lower level enemies. In Tobira's run, he does some grinding in Shibuya and Ginza's underpass to reach these specific thresholds before doing more fusions about 2 hours in. Here, you can see Tobira fusing for Minakata, which requires level 17 on the main character. But if you take a look at the footage here, he's kinda doing something weird. In Nocturne, you can pass some abilities from the original two demons to the demon being produced. This is useful in getting abilities on party members who couldn't normally learn them. However, this mechanic comes with a small catch. In the original versions of the game, you can't manually select which abilities are inherited onto the new demon. This means that in order to get the abilities you want, the selection has to be cancelled and started again until the desired abilities are obtained. Now this took about 13 seconds for Tobira to get Secunda on Minakata, which is a pretty small amount of time compared to how long the run actually is. Unfortunately, there's a ton of these fusions throughout the game, and some of them call for more than one ability to be passed on. This is compounded when attempting another type of fusion we need to cover. Normally, you can only fuse 2 demons at a time in the Cathedral of Shadows, but when Kagutsuchi is full, you can add a 3rd demon to enhance the result. This is called Sacrificial Fusion, and there's a couple of benefits to this. First, the experience from the sacrificed demon is multiplied by 1.5 and added onto the fused demon. This is useful for quickly reaching thresholds for transformation, getting abilities without having to grind for those levels, and allowing lower level demons to catch up in stats during the late game. The next, and just as important feature comes in the form of how abilities can be transferred. If you want a demon to inherit a specific skill, but none of the fusion options have that ability in their arsenal, Sacrificial Fusion can be used to bypass that, since every demon can be sacked. Even though this is a great strategy for speedrunning, this also is restricted by the main character's level, so there's no making any over-leveled demons here. There is one last thing I forgot to cover about fusions, and that's the fusion accident mechanic. Whenever you fuse a demon, there is a 1 in 256 chance to have an accident, which will produce a completely different demon than intended. This is compounded during a full Kagutsuchi phase, increasing the chances immensely.
Shit. Okay, so there's our 1 in 16. Pretty safe, right? You know, we could do worse than Saki Matama for some fuck up. What? I'm gonna run out of money! I'm not gonna be able to afford the Magatama at the end of the game.
Thankfully, runners can simply save before a fusion to remove any fears of it killing a run, but it can still result in time loss if an accident occurs. These are just a few out of many mechanics Tobira used to complete the game. There's a ton more, like management of resources, knowing when to switch Magatamas, aligning Kagutsuchi cycles for routing, and many more things. One of the most important ones involved the use of buffs and debuffs to reduce damage taken and increase damage dealt in fights. These are done through the respective Kaja and Unda abilities, increasing or reducing stats by 1 level with a max of 4 levels in either direction. These aren't the only ways to modify stats, however, as these other abilities are obtained later on. Warcry for 2 levels of attack and magic attack reduction, Fog Breath for 2 levels of accuracy and evasion reduction, and Taunt for 2 levels of defense reduction with a trait of 2 levels of attack increase. Debilitate is another excellent ability that lowers all enemy stats by 1 level. All of these are useful in quickly moving from a preparation phase to an attack phase in a fight, with Debilitate being the main debuff used against in-game bosses. Buffs being so important are thanks to how actions in battle are calculated. Several of the game's battle formulas work with the user's and target's level in some way. For example, if you get hit with a normal physical attack, a higher level enemy is going to deal more damage than a lower level one with the same strength stat. This extends to other things like chances to miss an enemy, going first in random battles, getting ambushed, the list goes on. So with that long-winded explanation out of the way, we can go back to Tobira's run and see that he took advantage of all this and more during his stream. And after a few hours into his run, Romscout and the gang watching him didn't just think he was doing great. They thought Tobira was unstoppable.
His route works. I like it a lot better than Mizushima's. Like, it just kicks Mizushima's route's ass. Like.
Yatta! Yatta!
On May 6th, 2012, Tobira achieved a new world record with a time of 15 hours, 35 minutes, and 33 seconds in JRT8 timing, cutting his previous goal of 16 hours by a massive amount. This was a massive hurdle that Tobira overcame, but unbeknownst to the English runners at the time, he knew he could push the run down much further than that. Part of this was due to the strategies that Tobira implemented in his run. While there were slow points with tons of grinding and other time loss we'll cover in just a bit, various bosses and encounters throughout the game were handled in ways Romscout never even thought of. Let's take a look at the Ambala Temple as an example. In this area, there are 3 separate temples. Each of them have their own quirks and puzzles, but all of them have bosses that require out-of-the-box thinking to defeat quickly. There's Albion in the White Temple, who can summon minions throughout the fight and requires all of them to be defeated in a single turn. Aciel in the Black Temple, who only uses physical attacks and can reduce the party's HP to 1. And finally, there's Scotty in the Red Temple, who drains physical damage and casts powerful physical and magic abilities. Since none of the Western runners have gotten around to routing the later half of the game, Most of the tech Tobira used was foreign to them. This made for some pretty hilarious reactions, particularly in the ACL fight when seeing Hanuman using Tetrakarn for the first time.
Wow.
Daisoja's just like, by the way, you didn't know I could have this move, did she? Oh my god, this guy is fucked!
While there were plenty of clever ways to save time, there were just as many ways Tobira could lose his lead. In the early stages of a game's speedrunning history, massive time swings like these are not uncommon to see. Where there's a ton of time saved from testing routes and strategies on previously unbroken ground, time loss can come from lack of experience or just plain bad luck. Tobira's run had a ton of this loss, starting with the fusions I mentioned earlier. Adding up the time he spent in the Cathedral Shadows, he lost somewhere close to 30 minutes on fusion attempts, with most of this coming from the late game demons. Fusions for Onkot, Daisojo, and Loa during the last half made up for over a third of this time loss, but the fusions are necessary to progress quickly in this route. Onkot turns into Hanuman, and then Wukong after gaining a certain amount of levels, becoming one of the best physical attack demons in the game. As for Daisojo, between his health and MP drain with meditation, and prayer having an AoE status heal and full heal, he's one of the best support demons in the game. Back on the topic of time loss, there were also several brutal deaths and resets throughout Tobira's attempt. Right before the Matador fight in Ginza Underpass, Inugami died in a random encounter, causing a 4-minute time loss. He's essential for healing and buffs in the upcoming boss fight, and with the low availability of revival items in the run, Tobira couldn't afford to lose a revival bead before this fight. As for the boss, for those who don't know about Matador, he's this game's version of the SMT wake-up call boss. Leading up to this point, the bosses are not terribly difficult. Fornius at the end of Shinjuku Medical Center goes down easy with the Lek attacks, and while the troll in Ginza can wipe the party pretty easily with AoE attacks, putting it to sleep makes the fight a ton safer. As for Matador, well, his fight is a bit more complicated. Matador has a variety of attacks and abilities that are rough to deal with in the early game. Red Capote on turn 1 gives him an instant +4 boost to agility, then a mix of attack and Mazan can decimate allies if specific ones are focused. Inugami taking a death is a scary one here, as he's responsible for healing the party with Medea throughout the fight. Runners can buff their stats, and second a Matador down to +1 agility, preventing a Red Capote recast when he has 0 or negative modifiers in the stat. However, after about half his HP is depleted, Matador enters phase 2, and things get tricky. Matador starts using focus to boost physical attacks by 2.5 times, and then there's his unique Andalusia attack, which hits multiple random targets. This part of the fight becomes a DPS race, where the runner needs to finish the battle quickly to avoid death. Tsukukaja, Rakukaja, and a source of AoE healing are the fundamentals of the encounter, which is why Tobira grinds in the Ginza Underpass for these before fighting the snazzy dressed fiend. Other major pain points include deaths in the Assembly of Nihilo, an area that contains enemies like Kopatengu, who has area of effect attacks and an ability where he can sacrifice himself to deal severe almighty damage to someone. Bosses here such as Eligor and Kaiwan can also use Mudo, a death element attack which can instantly kill those who don't resist it. Usually, this has a modest 40% chance to work, but anyone who has played an SMT game will tell you otherwise. There were 2 costly deaths in the Labyrinth of Amala that set Tobira back by over 30 minutes, with one in Kalpa 2 that was mostly preventable. Let's talk about this important location called the Cursed Hallway.
One big way to lose a run is doing Cursed Hallway, and it involves walking through a spiraling hallway where your party's HP gets halved each step you take, and in there you find level 60 to 70 demons and encounters while we're still in our 30s. And the reward at the end of the hallway is 250k Maka. And getting through the Cursed Hallway involves using the encounter indicator and counting the steps until you reach an encounter, and healing on the last step before getting an encounter. So the 3 main ways of dying, other than miscounting steps and getting an encounter without any demons summoned with 1 HP, are ice attacks, fizz attacks, and dark attacks targeting MC. So ice is the most frequent flavor of death, and none of our demons null ice, so we equip a Null Ice Magatama, which still leaves us vulnerable to Fizz and Dark. And since we don't progress through the Labyrinth of Amala any earlier, dying means that you have to redo everything in the first Kalpa, so each Cursed Hallway death is 10 plus minutes of time loss.
Tobira, like the madman he was, tried to run through without healing at all, but as he was reaching the end, one of the encounters killed him, sending him back to the save point at the beginning of the labyrinth. Now, while this seems completely unfair, some of the risk can be mitigated through small but important actions. Healing after taking damage while the encounter indicator is red, and putting on a Null Ice Magatama are great examples of these. Now, those of you who are new to Nocturne are probably wondering, what the hell is a Magatama? Magatamas are unique to the main character, and using them effectively is crucial to playing the game. There are 25 separate Magatamas, all obtained from shops, minigames, and bosses. These provide different skills while equipped when leveling up to specific levels, and also give certain elemental resistances and weaknesses. Equipping these Magatamas at the right times will ensure runners have correct abilities throughout the game, and help with survivability with random encounters and bosses. Moving to late game time loss, in the Tower of Kagutsuchi, Tobira died 3 times to random encounters after the second Thor fight, another 30-minute time loss. The tower as a whole, especially in the upper floors, has a wide range of demons that can dish out many forms of damage. This means the party can only be optimized for areas up to a specific point, opting to focus on demons most likely to end a run. Moving forward to his final battle with Lucifer, it also negatively impacted the final time, but it's a bit more complicated than you might think. Lucifer has a massive pool of HP, 65,535 to be exact, the most out of any boss in the game. This also means that his fight is split up into 3 phases, with each one changing at around every 20,000 HP that's depleted from the boss. With each phase, he begins using more powerful abilities that put the party in danger of wiping. Notable ones are High King, an AoE attack that hits like a truck and can bind party members. Then there's Root of Evil, an attack that can't kill, but will hit for up to 90% of the player's health and can also inflict status effects. Now, typically this is the end of it, and runners can make it through the fight within 10 to 15 minutes if they get okay luck. And that's all fine and dandy, but Tobira's fight in this run took 45 minutes. Lucifer can randomly use Dekunda or Dekaja in any of his phases, removing debuffs or buffs and forcing the player to reapply these stat modifiers. This can be extremely dangerous as some attacks come close to one-shotting a character. Tobira's fight saw a ton of Dekunda and Dekaja use, so that stalled his damage for at least a turn or so every time it happened. This fight is actually one of the reasons abilities like Life Gain and Life Surge are put on the final party. The damage can get ridiculous here, so these boosts to health are essential for survival. This was all pretty annoying for Tobira, but there's one more thing that made the fight extremely long. I can guarantee you that most of you have never seen Lucifer do this before. Typically when he heals, it's only for a couple hundred HP, and you thank him for not wiping your party. Here, it's his entire pool of health, and it's thanks to one more version of Nocturne that released exclusively in Japan. The Maniac's Chronicle version of Nocturne was released in 2008 as a bundle with a limited plus edition of Devil Summoner 2. For those unfamiliar, this is the version that the HD remaster is based off of. The game features Raido Kuzunoha from the Devil Summoner series instead of a certain demon hunter we'll talk about later on. After recruiting him in Kalpa 5, Raido is brought to a few final boss fights as he gets great abilities, including a useful one at level 83 called Raido the Eternal. This grants him a 1.5 times multiplier on all damage, and his physical and physical almighty attacks gain Pierce. Pierce is an ability normally attained from the first Magatama, Marogare, and can only be unlocked after completing the Labyrinth of Amala side dungeon. Gaining this lets the user's physical and physical almighty attacks bypass all resistances except for repel. This is extremely useful for the Lucifer fight as he has a 75% resistance to all damage, including almighty damage. In the Maniacs version, the only way to get Pierce is to buy a Jirime Kala from the shady broker in the 5th Kalpa for 200,000 Maka. Now this wouldn't be too bad, except you need to have Metatron in your party to access the room he's in, and given his fusion criteria and his base level of 95, it's safe to say runners can't get him when going for a new record. Back to the final battle, Tobira now has 2 party members that can inflict full damage on the boss. Like I was mentioning earlier though, The trade-off of this version is the unbearable Lucifer fight. Seriously, it wasn't enough for him to have Diarahan added to his moveset, but developers also had to give Root of Evil a Dakaja effect as well. However, despite the fight being a reset due to the full heal, Tobira's perseverance paid off, and with his final party of Daisojo, Loa, and Raido, he was able to finish this out. In the coming months after he attained his time, he continued to refine his route to push towards a new goal of under 14 hours. Unfortunately, with work once again cutting into his personal time, and some of his attempts being on the now defunct Ustream, we wouldn't see much from him except a post claiming a time of 14 hours, 37 minutes, and 10 seconds on January 13th of 2013. After that, Tobira would talk less frequently about Nocturne, and his contributions to the game came to a halt, along with the progression of the hard TDE category. During this point in the history, the speedrunning community would continue to grow in the live streaming space thanks to Twitch and Speedruns Live. These sites would be the home to runners doing attempts and races of their respective games, bringing in tons of new viewers, with some getting interested in the games themselves. This era led to RomScout finishing notes for TDE, but no true demon ending runs would come from him or BML, with RomScout opting to do the shorter normal Musubi category instead. Fast forward just over 3 years later, and Nocturne's TDE scene was pretty much the same, despite the exponential growth of the overall speedrunning scene. However, people were still talking about Nocturne and how it would be cool to see more runners for the game. It wouldn't be long before their wishes were granted, because someone with years of experience would dip their toes into Nocturne. Pink Pajamas, or PPJ for short, was already a veteran speedrunner with an impressive resume dating back to the SDA era. Having competitive times in the Disgaea series would prepare PPJ for what Nocturne had in store, and in January of 2016, Pink Pajamas completed his first playthrough with the speedrun route. In mid-February, PPJ did his first segmented run over the course of 3 days. His final time for his first attempt was 22 hours and 50 minutes, and from then on, he knew he was hooked. As with many first runs, PPJ's had a ton of mistakes, but considering this was his first attempt with speed strats, getting under 24 hours is one hell of an accomplishment. However, what's really interesting about this run is the fact that he didn't even use Tobira's route. So remember when I mentioned how Tobira's 1636 from March of 2012 beat Mizushima's 1840 from December of 2011? Mizushima slowly began to refine his route, occasionally streaming updates to his Nico Video Live page when work wasn't getting in the way. Unfortunately, these early runs are another hole in our history, as the videos were not saved anywhere online, so all that was left were the notes that Mizushima used for his attempts. He eventually listed his notes for these runs on his website for others to use, and PPJ was one of those people who could use them. It turns out, PPJ could read, write, and speak Japanese, so he was able to translate Mizushima's hard TDE notes. Doing this, along with making some revisions for the English version of Nocturne, PPJ had everything he needed to dive further into the game.
Well, yeah, when I first started running, I didn't even know about Maniac's Chronicle. So the first route I wrote down was just, I looked at Mizushima's notes and translated them. I didn't even look at a video. He had his route posted on his blog, and I just translated it and went from there, not even knowing that it was a Maniac's Chronicle route instead of a Maniac's route. That's, the only version we had over here was Maniacs.
With all this in mind, let's talk about what makes Mizushima's route so different from Tobira's. Mizushima spent more time in the Shinjuku Medical Center, recruiting a demon called Will-O-Wisp in addition to the others Tobira recruited. Willy, as the community likes to call him, learns Ribarama at level 3. This gave Mizushima an extremely early source of the spell, allowing him to grind levels quickly after the dungeon boss, Fornius. Unfortunately, recruiting Willy is much easier said than done. with most runs losing a ton of time or even resetting to this elusive demon. Willie belongs to one of the few demon families that can't be recruited normally. If you try to talk to him, he can't understand you and the potential negotiation doesn't happen. There are several ways to get around this, but they're all inconsistent and annoying. Starting the battle and having him randomly talk to you, which is pretty rare. Attacking him and putting him at critical HP will cause him to talk to you at times, but that is also rare. And finally talking to him at full Kagetsuchi, where he'll actually listen to the player. There's a couple of things runners can do to improve their chances. After leaving a Willy at critical HP, the main character can use the Analyze skill repeatedly to try and recruit him. This counts as an attack that does 0 damage, so there's a 5% chance for Willy to beg for mercy every time it happens. The only surefire way to recruit Willy without all of this is to have Jive Talk from the Satan Magatama, but runners are way off from having access to this, so it's not even a possible solution. Now I did just mention that Kagetsuchi influences Willy during these fights, but it also influences a ton of other things too. There's also these two abilities, Dark Might and Bright Might, and they were the foundation for taking on bosses in Tobira's route. These give a 100% critical hit chance on basic attacks during new and full Kagetsuchi respectively. However, this comes at the cost of additional pre-encounter setup, running around to change the Kagetsuchi phase, dealing with encounters before getting the Estoma ability, and a few other time sinks that simply slow things down. Mizushima's route cuts a ton of this out, using Bright Might only once and using Dark Might in 7 boss fights in the run. Even though there's a couple of Dark Might sources in the route, this is mainly covered by Minakata, a demon from the Kishin family who is the earliest source of Zionga and has Null Expel and Repel Elect. Tobira and Mizushima both used him in their runs, with Mizushima's route taking him all the way through Yoyogi Park and using him in a sack fusion for Orthrus from the Beast family. This leads to our next change really deep into the run. Orthrus gets used from post Yoyogi Park all the way through the Labyrinth's 4th Kalpa near the end of the game. Mizushima's route gives him Rakukaja from Minakata and Tsukukaja from Akushi Mitama for buffs. Combine this with Orthrus' ability to drain fire, use Warcry, and some decent physical abilities, he's pretty useful until getting fused later on. After the first boss in the Tower of Kagetsuchi, Orthrus is fused with Unicorn to make Yatagarasu, which is then used in a special fusion with Mikazuchi and a sacked Uzume to make Amaterasu. Amaterasu is one of the several demons that can only be attained through a very specific fusion. Most of these are not worth doing in a speedrun, but Amaterasu is one of the easiest to do and has some traits that are absolutely worth it. First of all, she has Void Fire, Expel, and Death, which are decent immunities in the late game. She also starts with Prominence, a heavy fire attack which hits random enemies and can even double hit a target. These are all great, but the real payoff was at level 58, where Amaterasu learns Debilitate. I didn't cover this earlier, but in Tobira's run, Loa was the source of Debilitate in the endgame. Loa's fusion required less setup than Amaterasu's, but because she had better coverage with abilities and resistances, Amaterasu was the better choice for Mizushima's route. Now, this did require some EXP management due to the Uzume sacrifice adding experience to the final fusion. If she had too many levels, her multiplied experience put into Amaterasu would cause her to level past the main character, preventing her fusion. This is why Uzume can't go past level 25 with 4300 experience to the next level in this route. Other demons that have level restrictions here are Huapo, Minakata, and Makami due to when they are sacked. Other demon variances include later fusions of some of the early game demons from Tobira's run, recruiting Dees at level 23 in the Assembly of Nihilo, who has Tetraja, an ability that voids an Expel or Death attack which covers the entire party. She also transforms into Valkyrie and eventually gets fused up into Amaterasu. Oni is another demon recruited thanks to Uzume's Seduce ability in the Mantra HQ, who gets a range of useful abilities like Warcry, Estoma, and Life Gain. He also gets fused with another brute demon to create an Earthis, then a Mitama later on to start those in-game power-ups I mentioned earlier. Koppa is recruited to talk away other Koppas in the Assembly of Nihilo, and eventually turns into a powerful force magic user after 2 transformations into Kurama. Titania is also recruited in Yoyogi Park to use in a boss fight and then fused into Lakshmi, a Megami demon that has the ability Meteorahan, voids ailments, and reflects Expel, traits super useful for the endgame. As for the demons that didn't make the cut from both Tobira's run and Mizushima's notes, PPJ removed Arahabaki after some earlier testing, due to PPJ feeling like he wasn't necessary for the route. Arahabaki is one of those demons considered high risk, high reward, with him having a ton of elemental weaknesses, coupled with a few key resistances and high damaging abilities. Some other demons from Tobira's run were cut as well, like Nozuchi, Bayath-Katha, and Troll, as they didn't fit into the route. Now there is one more character that PBJ didn't include, and that's because we're not on the right version to use him. Raido Kuzunoha is swapped for none other than Dante from the Devil May Cry series. He comes with a very similar skill set to Raido, except he doesn't come with Pierce, an extremely unfortunate exclusion. He also has a different quirk when you recruit him in the 5th Kalpa than Raido. Dante wants you to call a coin flip before you hire him. This determines his price. If you call it right, you only pay 1 Maka for his services, but if you call it wrong, he takes half of your current Maka. Raido, however, is much more forgiving. In fact, Raido is so nice, he pays you 100,000 Maka if you choose the tile on the left side of the screen. He does, however, have one more special ability that makes him superior. When he shows up on screen, he makes spectators comment Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series in the chat. Look folks, I don't make the rules. It's Dante's world, and we're all just living in it. Over the next several months, PBJ would begin a grind to push his time towards the record, but he wouldn't be doing it alone. PBJ's friends would sit with him in Discord calls, making jokes and hanging out to distract from the suffering that Nocturne tends to inflict.
I'm adding that to my channel right now.
Oh man. Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, looking out his scroll chat.
This Dimsdale Dimmadome looking out of his SpongeBob's window and Knuckles featuring Dante. Do it!
Oh man.
I know what that laugh means.
Oh man, I know that. We all know what this means. Like, what a game.
Speech.
Speech? I need to pee pretty badly. That's my speech.
June rolls around, and PPJ is now just 40 minutes off of Tobira's time. Most of this is thanks to getting familiar with the route and building more confidence as he went on. When runners pick up a new speedrun, they're usually heading into unknown territory. Even if the game has a beaten path, most people still stumble and lose their way. So it makes sense that as PPJ was getting SMT'd, he was learning the ins and outs of this game.
Like when you're playing casually, you'll probably die a whole bunch, but you can learn from every single one of those deaths. There's always something that you can do to play safer or to have a better play. And even when I was doing a lot of my earlier runs, I would have tons of deaths, but like pretty much every single death, I'm like, okay, I did a misplay. I could have avoided that death if I did something else. And I just learned from that, and now the deaths of runs nowadays get to the single digits.
As he was following in the footsteps of already established routes, he started to make his own changes, even as quickly as his second full run. First of all, PPJ realized he didn't have enough Maka to fuse Kusi Mitamas into Lakshmi near the end of a previous PB. This problem was due to using a compendium summoned Wukong for passing Life Surge. The Demon Compendium allows for the registering and summoning of demons, with a small cost of some Maka to summon them. Wukong unfortunately costs a hefty 39,600 Maka in one of PPJ's runs, and combining this with other costly in-game summons, that pretty much left him broke until his next paycheck. This meant he had to go ask the devil for a loan, so he went to the Labyrinth of Amala to grind some money. The holes going to each Kalpa contain a minigame where the Demi-Fiend can punch specific flying debris for Maka. The hole leading to the 5th Kalpa can net players over 10,000 Maka with each trip, so it's a great place to grind money. However, grinding in a speedrun is slow, so PPJ came up with a small detour to recruit a Titan from the Amala Temple's White Temple. He comes with the Taunt ability and learns Life Surge at level 51, a pretty good combination. It also fell in line with the already established route. Since PPJ needed to complete the story trigger for the final dungeon anyways, a quick Titan recruit was no problem. Titan could then be fused to get Titania, removing the need to recruit her and passing Life Surge at the same time. Titania also came with Glacial Blast, so combined with Amaterasu's fire abilities and Dante's elect coverage, the reason boss Noah can be fought before the endgame grind in Yoyogi Park. PPJ would take these changes, along with the experience gained over the last couple of months, and in mid-June, he would get a run that was on pretty decent pace. PPJ's early game was going well, staying within a good range of his last PB. The beginning is typically hard to keep up with, due to how random recruiting demons can be and not having access to the compendium until Ikebukuro. As the run kept going, PPJ's time compared to his personal best continued to improve, all until he reached the Assembly of Nihilo. The Assembly is one of the more dangerous areas of the early to mid-game. I've talked about how annoying demons like Koppa, Eligor, and Kaiwan can be, but let's cover a couple more bosses we didn't touch on earlier. One of the bosses, Barith, doesn't have any instant kill spells, but his fire abilities are annoying for those not immune. He also has Heat Wave, a high accuracy AoE attack with a medium chance to crit. His fight also have a pair of succubus that accompany him, but since they only have 2 abilities that can put a character to sleep or charm them, they're not bad to deal with. For context, the random battles with succubus are actually more dangerous due to them having Eternal Rest, an AoE attack that has a 100% chance to kill any character that's afflicted with sleep. The boss of this area is Ose, a high damage physical attacker who has a ton of utility in his arsenal. This boss has the Focus ability, enhancing physical damage by 2.5 times for the next attack. With this in mind, he comes packing Heat Wave for his physical ability. As for utility, he can use Tetrakarn or Makarakarn to repel physical or magical attacks. Then to top it all off, he has Dekunda, Dekaja, and Sukukaja to make him even more annoying. Luckily, PPJ didn't have any major problems with the area and ended up 11 minutes ahead after Ose. While this was huge, there were still many barriers that could hold this run back if the game felt like it. The next few areas are excellent examples of this, starting with Kabukicho Prison and the path leading up to it. The route to this place is accessed after taking a special exit out of Mantra HQ, and also has a challenge of its own. Hellbiker is one of the 10 fiends that need to be defeated to reach the game's true ending, and is usually the second one you run into after Matador.
I think most of the other runners of PPJ's route will agree with me, but I hate Hellbiker the most. He always goes first, and he either opens with Hell Exhaust, which is what you want to see, or attack into Hellspin, which one-shots whoever gets the first attack, excluding MC. So, additionally, you can't realistically use buffs against him because his Hell Exhaust has a Dekaja effect, and he can use Dekunda and get rid of his debuffs, and he can spam it if you're unlucky. And attack Hellspin can still one-shot your demons, even if he is debuffed. And once he gets low enough, he'll use Hell Throttle, which gives him more turns, and then either uses a magic pattern with Hell Exhaust into Hellburner. But the other thing he can do is attack Hellspin twice. And a lot of the time, this is a squad wipe if nobody dodges any of the attacks.
This fight can end a run in an instant, and there's nothing players can do about it if he decides to ruin your day. However, there's one strategy that can let runners progress if they're lucky. Check this out.
She is a split life though. That's...
It turns out, you can just say no to fighting Hellbiker. It has a 60% chance to work, and with the save point nearby, each attempt just takes a minute or two. The only exception to this is when you trigger the cutscene at full Kagutsuchi. Then there's 0% chance for this to work. In this run, PPJ accidentally said yes the first time, wasting over a minute, but considering he was so far ahead with over 10 hours to go, this wasn't a concern for him. Next up was Kabukicho, which takes around 15 minutes or so to complete. He even gets the ability Mind's Eye midway through the dungeon from the Kamudo Magatama, reducing the likelihood of a back attack by 33%. So it seems like this dungeon's gonna be a piece of cake, right?
I'm really considering resetting over that. Yeah, I'm just out of MP.
Due to running low on resources, PPJ was unable to continue and had to reload from the beginning of the area. setting him back by about 5 minutes. This was rough, but fortunately he still had time to spare from his current lead. So after getting himself together, he pushed through the dungeon one more time, getting the spoon for the imprisoned mannequin and avoiding death on the way to the area's boss. All PBJ needed to do now is take down Big Mizuchi, and that was pretty much it.
It's not Sima Bufudang. Glacial Blast. Double hit. Shoot.
After already bleeding time on this split, PPJ takes a devastating death thanks to Mizuchi's Glacial Blast getting a double hit. He tried to recover the fight, but after running out of revival items and getting close to the end, death was inevitable. This sent PPJ all the way back to the beginning of the prison, and 20 minutes wasted with any sort of lead completely erased. Now, while many of the bosses in the game have strategies to make them safe, some of the earlier bosses like Big Mizuchi have run-ending levels of RNG. Some of this can be mitigated, like setting up for the first turn Mirage attack, going in with the Iomante Magatama equipped, alongside Unicorn and Makami with Void Mind prevents confusion. However, this leaves all party members vulnerable to ice, which Mizuchi takes advantage of here. Glacial Blast is the last thing runners want to see from this boss. Coming in at the heavy damage level, it hits random party members and can potentially double hit any of them. Buffs and debuffs can help mitigate this damage, but with only 3 party members in the beginning, setting up the party becomes more complicated. And now PPJ could have saved in the regular world before this, ensuring he wouldn't lose much progress, but that's where another issue would pop up. After the Mizuchi boss fight, there are these mystic chests that contain essential items for the speedrun. However, these chests have 2 potential outcomes as they're tied to the Kagutsuchi phase. Starting at 0% for new and ending with 100% for full, these are the chances of getting the true item from the chest. Outside of full, there's a chance to not obtain the item, leaving the player with just a single life stone instead. The step route didn't allow for the save at the time, and moving around to circle the phase back to Rising 2/8 at the S terminal was really slow. PPJ did everything right in the moment, but with the routing not bearing on the side of caution, Nocturne knew exactly when to strike. In RPG speedrunning, many runners know that luck comes with the territory. Things tend to happen outside their control. However, some will even go as far to say that the game knows, whether it be a surprise encounter, normally consistent strategies not working, or even going as far as the game crashing. The game knows when you're on a good pace, and it will do everything in its power to stop you. Despite all this, PPJ kept his cool and continued his attempt, despite knowing how great the time loss would be. Thankfully, he was able to get past Big Mizuchi on his second try, with the rest of the dungeon giving him a pass.
That splits.
18 minutes behind was hard to deal with, but he had more time save coming up. Another hour later, he was approaching Obelisk, easily the most notorious dungeon in Nocturne. Most casual playthroughs that make it to the mid-game will stall here, and it can wall runners pretty hard if it wants to. The first part of Obelisk is very manageable. There's coverage for anything you'll run up against, and summoning Uzume to use Trifuri to run is the way to go. There are also several Kagutsuchi phase puzzles on the way up, but runners have these memorized so there's no difficulty there. At first glance, the dungeon seems pretty simple. However, as runners ascend, getting closer to the top, things get a little more dangerous. Higher up in the tower, different enemies start to show with more varied abilities. Runners at this point don't have the coverage to deal with the increasing dangers, so they just have to pick a Magatama that covers the most common situations and hope they don't get screwed. PBJ was having a great first half of Obelisk, and he was just a couple floors away from the dungeon's boss. After being almost 19 minutes behind, a deathless Obelisk would put PBJ in a great position for the rest of the run.
Gino joined party.
16 minutes of progress turned to dust with a single attack. Hellgaze is a death element instant kill ability that has a 70% chance to hit its target. Since PPJ didn't have a null death Magatama on like Anathema, the Demi-Fiend never stood a chance. This was extremely unlucky and sent PPJ back to floor 40 from floor 118. Any other person probably would have reset at this point, but PPJ was willing to play it out, as his previous PB's Obelisk wasn't that great either, and it was another chance to keep getting better at the mid to late game. After another short trek, he made it past where he died and was ready to take on each of the Moirai sisters. The first fights with the trio come in the form of a Kagutsuchi puzzle gauntlet, meaning they all need to be fought in a row to progress. Like in the Thor gauntlet, runners can heal and change party members, so the fights become fairly simple. All of them follow the standard requirement for buffs and debuffs, with each having small variances in strategies. Clotho requires the use of Tetraja to prevent instant death. Lachesis can use Tetrakarn and Makarakarn, along with additional buffs. Players bring Principality to this fight thanks to Bright Might and the Kagutsuchi always being full here. Atropos attacks with powerful spells, so the party is designed to keep up healing and cover some elements. All of these fights also have the Demi-Fiend using Mana Drain to keep MP high, and Tornado to inflict massive damage. This carries over into the final fight with all three Moirai sisters, with the typical buffing and debuffing, then a Tornado Mana Drain combo to seal the deal. Runners do need to pay attention while they're dunking on the sisters, as runners have been known to confuse Makakaja with something a lot more frightening.
I'll get up and stretch during the cutscene. Wowie.
Despite the last hour and a half being an absolute tragedy, PPJ was able to safely defeat the sisters. There is one more risky section after the fight, where runners need to backtrack to the last save point and escape. If the main character dies here, all progress since the last save is lost. So that means dealing with every boss fight and cutscene at the top once again. PPJ had a very close call thanks to a back attack, but luckily he managed to escape and move on to the next area. So about 25 minutes behind, PPJ went into Yoyogi Park, and while the area isn't much of a run killer due to the save points nearby, time loss from encounters and bosses gone wrong is very possible. At the end of the area, there's a two-part boss fight with Jiramikala and Sakahagi, with players fighting the demon elephant first, followed by the psycho murder mannequin. Jiramikala repels physical attacks and voids expel, death, and ailments. Magic is essential in beating this boss, so PPJ uses Tornado with the main character and Zanma on Karasu. Add the use of attack mirrors to prevent physical damage and buffing, the fight turns into hoping that the boss doesn't hit any demons with Panic Voice, an AoE Mind type attack that has a 30% chance to panic, or use things like Dekunda to debuff the party. He also has an ability that we haven't talked about yet called Beast Eye. This is an enemy-only ability that gives back half the press turns after using one. In this case, Beast Eye gives you 2 turns. There's other abilities that give 3 or even 4 of these turns back. Luckily, nearly every enemy in the game is coded to not use these abilities more than once in the same turn, but it's still annoying when the ability is used. Sakahagi, on the other hand, is a little less exciting. He has a 3-hit regular attack similar to what Incubus does. As for spells, he does have access to medium AoE damage for fire, ice, elect, and force abilities, but he doesn't start the fight with any MP because he used it all summoning Jiramikala. So with only having 1600 HP, Sakahagi goes down pretty quick. Looking back at PPJ's run, Yoyogi Park and the Asakusa Tunnel that comes before it were great for him. As for the 2 bosses I just talked about, he had a little hiccup with Karasu dying and Minakata being forced out of battle due to being panicked. However, PPJ recovered quickly and defeated both bosses, landing him a 6.5 minute time save when splitting at the Magatsui device cutscene, giving him his best time on that split so far. PPJ's next segment ended up being a gold as well, saving nearly 9 minutes compared to his last run. Funny enough, this is one of a few time saves that came down to him actually using his notes instead of doing the route from memory. PPJ did a lot of rerouting and testing before diving into attempts, so it's not surprising that he didn't adjust his notes for the current route he was using. Regardless, PPJ was on an absolute tear, and by the time he finished the Amala Temple, he was rocking back and forth on the edge of PB pace. It'd be like this for a little while, which included a boss fight at the beginning of Yurakucho Tunnel. However, this boss fight wasn't a normal one, it was an encounter with another fiend by the name of Trumpeter. If you've played Nocturne and reached this point of the game for the first time, you know how frustrating this boss can be since his mechanics are not really explained. Every certain amount of turns, Trumpeter will cast Holy Melody and Evil Melody. These abilities target whoever has the lowest percentage of HP in the fight. Holy Melody restores HP and MP to full, but Evil Melody will instantly kill a target with a 100% chance. To clarify, Trumpeter can target anyone in the battle with the heal, but the instant kill only targets our party. Trumpeter also comes with heavy level magic attacks, Megidolan, Dakaja, and Makakaja. Understandably, this boss can be a pain, but runners don't usually have problems with the fight. Trumpeter will always use Holy Melody on turn 1, Evil Melody on turn 4, then switches back and forth between them for the rest of the battle. This means that PPJ either needs to set up a character to be very low health before turn 8, or defeat Trumpeter on turn 7. How does he accomplish this? By bringing a party of Orthrus, Hanuman, and Daisojo, PPJ makes easy work of the boss by using a ton of buffs and debuffs, then setting up Orthrus to be the demon killed and healed by Trumpeter on those specific turns. Then Hanuman goes in with Focus and Brutal Slash, dealing over 1200 damage after buffing. After defeating Trumpeter, PPJ continues through the run and keeps gaining more time, hitting a 30-minute lead by the time he reaches the final dungeon, the Tower of Kagetsuchi. Now, I know we just went over several bosses, but we need to talk about a few more important ones in this area. There are 3 main bosses in the final dungeon that need to be defeated before fighting Kagetsuchi. These are Ahriman, Noah, and Bao Avatar. Each has their own quirk to throw off the player and require major changes to the party with each fight. Starting with Ahriman, he's always fought first and is probably the easiest of the 3. His gimmick is restricting player actions, and the first one he declares forbidden will always be physical attacks. If the player uses a physical attack, the attacker dies. This is pretty simple to overcome, as the player can just buff and use magic attacks during that time. Once Ahriman changes restrictions, runners can go all out with physical attacks. After he takes enough damage, he'll go into a second phase where he can use stronger attacks, but at this point he's taking so much damage that the battle ends in just a couple more turns. After going through more of the dungeon, here's where the routes begin to separate. Some routes will fight Noah first, and some have been known to fight Bao Avatar first, going back to fight Noah after grinding additional levels. We're going to cover Noah first, since that's what PPJ's route currently looks like. Noah is much more complicated than the Ahriman fight, as this is a test of the player's elemental attack coverage. After attacking Noah, he will repel physical attacks, gain 75% resistance to Almighty, and start shifting his elemental resistances in a specific order. His regular attacks ignore physical resistances, and he'll use heavy magic attacks that are opposite of the element you can hit him with. In Phase 2, he'll start using an attack called Domination that has a strong HP and MP drain. PPJ's strat here was to bring in Kurama, Amaterasu, and Titania for attack coverage of all elements. Combined with some buffs and debuffs, the fight is straightforward if runners pay attention. As for Bao Avatar, things here can get a little weird. The overall strategy is fairly simple on the surface: apply buffs and debuffs, then just burst her down until the fight ends. However, a couple of things make this fight slightly dangerous. This boss has a curse element ability called Bale's Bane, which turns the target into a fly. This reduces their stats significantly and leaves them weak to expel. This is obviously horrible if it hits anyone, so all party members need to be immune to curse in this fight. The main character gets this resistance from the Jed Magatama, which was acquired after defeating the Morai sisters in Obelisk. Easy enough, but after the boss hits around half HP, she'll use Divine Will on that turn and summon 2 powerful ghost demons. These demons have devastating abilities, including Diarahan, which will fully restore an ally's HP. If this happens, it's a reset. So runners avoid this by counting damage, then using a combination of focus and physical attacks to finish the fight, all before that first damage threshold is reached. Combine this with the powerful physical ability Deathbound, and Dante's Rebellion that has a 50% critical hit rate, and the fight turns into a joke. Deathbound is attained from the Gaia Magatama at level 61, with the Magatama locked behind a door in the Mantra HQ. This door requires the player to have a base strength of 24 or higher to open, so keep this in mind for later. Despite these bosses potentially being a pain, the strategies that runners use turn what could be horrible fights into some potential minor time loss. This is the power of preparing for not just these fights, but pretty much any encounter in the game. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there's the second Thor fight in the middle of all this, but at this point he's really a minor inconvenience. Buffs, debuffs, and physical abilities will do the job here. PPJ would tear his way through every single one of these fights, and after some final grinding and fusions, he'd make his way up to the final bosses. He managed to bring his lead back up to almost an hour ahead, so all that needed to happen was to seal the deal with the final fight.
The Japanese don't know English.
There goes Endure on main character. Endure's totally worth it.
On June 19th, 2016, PPJ obtained a final time of 15 hours, 26 minutes, and 29 seconds, beating out Tobira's time by about 9 minutes. After just 4 months of running Nocturne's hard TDE category, he managed to topple the earliest recorded record.
But there are times on like their profiles that are like mid-13s.
Before PPJ took his first steps into the world of Nocturne's hard TDE category, there was Tobira. But before Tobira was the runner I mentioned earlier by the name of Mizushima 40. Mizushima set a goal in October of 2011. It was to beat the game in under the 15-hour range. His attempts at first were unsuccessful, with his first time coming in at 18 hours and 40 minutes. But as the years went by, it was clear that he was set on achieving his goal. At the end of his initial grind in August of 2013, Mizushima would obtain a time of 13 hours, 36 minutes, and 42 seconds in JRTA timing, putting him nearly 2 hours ahead of PPJ's PB he just obtained. What's even more incredible is despite knowing of Tobira and his runs, Mizushima routed hard TDE without any help or influence from outside sources. Now again, there wasn't a video to support this claim since Japanese runners only needed to stream for proof, but his notes and knowledge proved this time was much closer to fact rather than fiction. This was the benchmark that PPJ needed to beat, and Mizushima was still theory crafting over the last year, estimating that the time could come down even further to around 12.5 hours. PPJ would get one more PB with the same route he used as his previous run, beating it out by just over 6 minutes on July 9th of 2016. This ended up being the opposite of his previous run, making up the time he lost in the early game, but losing most of it later on. One of these major time losses was from various sections of the diet building. There are 5 bosses here that can be fought, with one of them being optional. These are Cert, Mata, Mott, Mithra, and Samael. The first 4 are required fights in the run, and all of them besides Mithra can be extremely annoying. Starting with Cert, sometimes he'll just burst your party on turn 1 with Tempest, a powerful AoE physical attack. He also has strong fire abilities like Hellfire and Ragnarok, which can kill those not immune. And to top it all off, he has Beast Eye, an enemy-only ability that generates 2 press turns for the price of 1. Luckily, in this run, PPJ has a Null Fire Magatama and Drain Fire with Orthrus, making that less of an issue. Surviving turn 1 with no casualties means that the party's Tetrakarn user can start reflecting any physical attacks. Plus, even if PPJ dies here, there's a save really close, so any potential time loss isn't that bad. PPJ makes it past this fight first try, and moves on to the next boss in the bunch. Mata is another fight where it's not uncommon to die on turn 1. He has a heavy physical ability called Hades Blast, which has a high critical hit rate and can target the entire party. If this happens on turn 1, you'll likely have to try the fight again. He also drains physical and voids Expel, Death, and Ailments, making this purely a magic user fight. Runners can typically spam Tornado after setting up buffs and debuffs, and the Fiend Daisojo can heal any damage dealt or ailments inflicted with the Prayer ability. This is also one of the fights where Kurama is brought in, due to the physical attack restriction. Overall, this is another simple fight past turn 1. Tetrakarn, buffs, debuffs, and magic attacks bring down Mata fairly quickly. PPJ's PB demonstrated this as well, so he went on his merry way to the next boss. This is Mott, and he's Nocturne's most infamous boss. PPJ's overall strategy is to do the usual buffs and debuffs, combined with Mikazuchi's elect abilities to hit Mott's one weakness. Out of all the bosses so far, this is the one with the most resistance coverage, so PPJ took a bit of time to recruit a Jin for an early Mikazuchi fusion specifically for this situation. But funny enough, this isn't even the worst part of this fight. Mott has powerful spells like Mazandine and Megidolin. He can buff his magic with Makakaja, and even Dakunda is in his moveset to remove debuffs. He also has the strong physical AoE attack Tempest, and if that wasn't bad enough, he has Beast Eye like the previous bosses, but he's a little different than other Eye ability users. Most enemies in the game who can use Eye abilities will only use them once per turn. Mott, however, doesn't remove this ability from his pool after he uses it. This means that Mott can theoretically have infinite turns if he wanted. Combine this with the previously mentioned abilities and a little bit of bad luck, and you can get some hilariously bad results. The only way to really avoid this is to ensure agility is buffed to evade attacks, and to keep debuffing to maybe make him waste a turn using Dakunda. PBJ was not so lucky here.
Alright. I'll give that one to you. I'd rather... I only have one Bomb Horizon left. That's not a good start. Yep. I just have to hope... Okay, I'm gonna summon Daisojo, and hope he just does Makikaja. Or everyone just dodges.
PBJ died to Mott 5 times, an extremely unlucky time loss that is typically avoided. Thankfully, Mott's fight is near the save point when the adjacent door is unlocked, so repeated attempts can happen quickly. This means that Mott isn't much of a run killer as some other major points in the run, as not much progress is being lost. Regardless, this cost PBJ around 14 minutes on the boss alone, and is the big reason his lead was not bigger in the end. The last boss of the diet building is Mithra, and is a pretty easy one to handle. Valkyrie uses Tetrahdra repeatedly to protect against Mamudon, and physical attacks to burst the boss down after buffs and debuffs. Then there's the optional boss Samael, but he's skipped by not getting in Hikawa's way during the final diet building cutscene. All of this combined cost PBJ 19 minutes by the time he left the building. Besides this and bleeding time throughout the end of the game, PBJ pulled through. This run, however, would be it from him for the summer. ESA 2016 was coming up at the end of the month, and he had a Disgaea 2 run that was accepted, so he was working on practicing that. In the meantime, Mizushima was beginning to stream again on Nico Video Live. He was thinking about doing some major rerouting over the previous year, and he finally found the time to work these changes in while doing attempts. This is one of the first times that the community is able to see Mizushima in action, and PBJ took advantage of this by taking notes on what he was changing. Some of Mizushima's ideas including using Kuranzan instead of Hypixie as a source of Trifuri, getting Momonofu as soon as possible for the Arahabaki transformation, and then using Arahabaki's Kamikaze to decimate anti-physical bosses later on. He would also get Ganesha as the source of Debilitate instead of Amaterasu at the end of the game. The amount of ideas Mizushima had during this time was mind-boggling. He even tried cutting out Deathbound for Ironclaw, a highly inaccurate ability from the Kamurogi Magatama with strong damage and great critical hit rate. For random battles, the ability was completely useless, but on boss fights with buffs and debuffs applied, it had a lot of potential. However, this is one of the many things that Mizushima scrapped due to inconsistencies. After ESA Summer 2016, PBJ wrote up a pastebin on August 4th, saying that Mizushima was still rerouting hard TDE, and once that calms down, he'll take the ideas and make a new route that'll work on the Maniacs version. Until then, PBJ would continue his break from the category. He was looking for a new job and potentially moving at the time. Combine this with having to comb through Mizushima's reroutes, he decided to step back from the 15-hour run in favor of shorter runs in comparison. The Nocturne Discord channel died down a bit, and progression in the hard TDE category would depend on Mizushima's findings going into fall of 2016.